This episode of New Politics was released on the 1st of May, 2026, and produced on the lands of the Wangal and Gadigal people.
Who gets to decide what Australia Day stands for in modern Australia? And has Anzac Day become a political battlefield rather than a day of remembrance? Because this event has been hijacked and it's now being used by the far right to create ideological conflict and the culture wars. I'm Eddie Djokovic.
I'm David Lewis. All of this is coming up in this big episode of New Politics.
And if you're listening in and haven't subscribed to our website at New Politics, you're missing out on half of what we do. There's regular articles and analysis of this strange world of politics. It's all free, and you can subscribe at newpolitics.com.au. And of course, if you do want to support us, it's just $5 per month at Patreon and Substack, and all of this is a good way to support independent journalism. There's a range of culture wars going on at the moment, and we had a new chapter in the fast-developing Anzac Day culture war, which was previously restricted to events outside of the dawn service, but now actively includes the dawn service.
We gather today on land that is sacred. For thousands of years, people have gathered in this place to share stories, to celebrate culture, and to remember our ancestors. These rituals make it a sacred site, a precious inheritance of land and ceremony. Sacred to the Gadigal, people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians whose ancestors nurtured it through time.
This booing was encouraged by the right-wing group Fight for Australia, which is part of the March for Australia group, and it was also supported by Advance Australia. There was also a speech provided at an Anzac Day event at the Sydney Opera House, and for some reason it was provided by the mining magnate Gina Rinehart.
Today, our youth, from as young as 3, are taught they should be ashamed of our country and even hate it. They are taught our flag, under which so many of our families served and fought, is not the flag to treat with high regard and respect, but the I'm sorry flag. Our pioneers were productive, but today some of our freedoms are being eroded by increasing government tape and regulation, stopping our ability to be self-sufficient in fuel, driving down our living standards, making our electricity incredibly unreliable and expensive. Our immigration procedures must only allow immigrants who have been thoroughly checked, including their phones, iPads, laptops, and social media. We need to protect our country. This should not even be controversial. What Australians truly want, their families' lives hurt by terrorists.
And David, it was just 15 minutes of right-wing bile. She was quoting all the right-wing warriors, Winston Churchill, Ronald Reagan. She attacked transgender people as well for some strange reason. And none of this has got anything to do with Anzac Day or the events in 1915. And we have this unrepresentative swill of a mining magnate provided with a platform to tell us all about what Anzac Day is all about and turn it into a celebration for right-wing causes. And the right and the far right now think that they own Anzac Day and can turn it into whatever they want it to be. And as far as I'm concerned, it's just this exclusionary process that has to be resisted as much as possible.
About 10 years back, we started seeing Turkish returned soldiers, German returned soldiers and Croatian returned soldiers marching in. And now I might have missed them, and I missed the Martin Place parade this year, the city parade this year. But there seems to be less of that, and they're trying to push Anzac Day as a white, right-wing Christian celebration. I'm uneasy with prayers at Anzac Day. One of the very best memoirs of soldierhood, Peter Ryan's Fear Drive My Feet, he talks about his conversion to atheism, where he's hiding in the jungle and he starts to pray and he realizes this isn't going to help me at all. Now, I'm not saying that should be everybody's spiritual journey. I'm just explaining Peter Ryan's. I knew Peter a little bit, so I should probably declare that. But the Anzacs weren't white right-wing Christians. They were mostly working class who voted Labor. Yes, they were pro-monarchy, but that was the dominant paradigm in Australia in 1915. Britain is at war, so Australia must be at war. That gets repeated in 1939. Slightly morphed to all the way with LBJ in the 60s, but the protests start a lot quicker now. It took 4 or 5 years. It took really for the middle class to start getting conscripted here and in the States for the big protests to happen. When I say this, I know it's more complex than this, but a lot of it was people whose privilege suddenly wasn't protecting them anymore or wasn't protecting their families and realizing, oh, this is bad. And so you get Mothers Against War and things like that coming out of the middle class. Now, and to be fair, it's the middle class with the resources and time to be able to protest this stuff. The working class might hate it, but they've got less time to protest it and less money to be able to fund that type of thing. For it to become a celebration of right-wing ideals, which is where it's pushing towards. And I note that it's been since really the deaths of our remaining World War II veterans. There's still a few around, but they not in the numbers they were. And our Vietnam veterans, who the RSL always had problems with till about 1987. So the Vietnam veterans are starting to hit 75, 80 now. We have less of a corrective voice as to what this means. Now, I know that we've had returned troops from Somalia, from Afghanistan, from Indonesia, from Iraq, and their efforts must be commemorated too. That was just as much of a war as everywhere else was, but there's less of them. They weren't conscripted. There wasn't a huge public rush to enroll like there was in World War II, for example. And World War II had the conscription, but only for the reserves. Vietnam had conscription, of course. And as that went badly, no government has been game to conscript for foreign wars since, which is a good thing. And some of my school friends went to Afghanistan, went to Indonesia, So I'm not going to take the traditional view of this wasn't a real war. They should be commemorated.
Oh, that's right. But there's also that point about the cultural memory. Once all of these people are no longer with us, it's almost like there's an avenue for other people to come in and claim that history as well. And that's the thing that bothers me about all of this. And David, we weren't around in 1915, but I can safely say that the original Anzacs weren't culture war commentators, or they weren't actually there to defend our way of life. You know, that's something that always comes up. Oh, they defended our way of life. It wasn't about that at all. They weren't even there to protect Gina Rinehart's right to say whatever she wants 110 years later or whatever it is. But essentially it was all of that blood sacrifice that Andrew Fisher talked about at that time. He was the Prime Minister at that time in 1915, the idea of the blood sacrifice and wanting to send troops over for the sake of the British Empire. It wasn't so much about protecting Australia, it was about the British Empire. And as you pointed out, David, a lot of these people were workers. Most of them were union members, labourers, shearers, tradesmen. And if they were alive today, they probably would despise someone like Gina Rinehart. They were probably all working class, collectivist, probably diametrically opposite to all of those people that were booing the Dawn services all around Australia. So around 8,700 Australians died at Gallipoli, and I don't think they'd be too happy about dickheads booing at a welcome to country event at the Dawn service, and remembering that 1,300 Indigenous people did serve in World War I, and 300 of them were actually killed, and they served for a country and an empire that didn't even recognise them as citizens.
And they got back and were treated appallingly. They weren't allowed to join the RSL, weren't allowed to drink in RSL clubs or a lot of ex-services clubs. Didn't get the same level of soldier pay, the property and the educational opportunities and the pensions that most Anzacs got were denied to most of those soldiers. And it repeated in World War II. Stories, and you wonder how much of this is a little bit retrospective and tidied up, but trying to catch up with your friend at the RSL and your friend being Indigenous gets kicked out. Now, the RSL has done a lot, to be fair, in the last few years to try and rectify a lot of this, but the history's still there. So when those Indigenous soldiers went, they paid a slightly higher price than the Anglo soldiers who went, or even the European soldiers who went on our behalf. As I said, things have changed slightly, but there's still a long way to go. And so when you get these morons who've never done anything for Australia, let's be fair, booing someone who either has, at the service that I did the sound for one of the local dawn services. They had a welcome to country and people listened quietly and let him speak. He gave a very nice speech of an appropriate length, welcomed everybody and went on. And that's how it should have been. But he spoke of those who served. He had been in the service himself, I think, so he could speak with some kind of feeling. Whereas these, I'm trying to think of a better word, but it's dickhead. These dickheads who, never having done anything worthwhile, never having achieved anything of any note or value, try and put down a group of people who did far more in 300 in Gallipoli or in World War One, far more than any of us could ever do. And I'm now starting to sound like an American loving the troops, but let's be fair, this is true. I forget the figures in World War One, and there were Indigenous soldiers who served in Vietnam and in fact all. So to boo them because you're confronted by the fact that there is an alternate history of Australia that you've heard but don't want to hear says less about you than it does about what the commemoration should be.
This is New Politics, independent analysis of Australian and international politics. For more free articles and analysis, join us at newpolitics.com.au.
And a lot of people are going to have their own interpretation of what Anzac Day actually means for them and for the community. And personally, I've never been a big fan of the modern Anzac Day. And if it's a commemoration of the people who have died in all of these futile wars, that's fine. That's what it should be. But it's become this jingoistic sort of almost like a celebration of war. And to me, it feels less like a day of reflection and more like a platform, as we noted before, that's been captured by right-wing political interests. And that's certainly been the case in the past couple of years or so. But when you've got figures like Gina Rinehart and Kerry Stokes dominating the national conversation on Anzac Day, not so much Kerry Stokes literally, but Kerry Stokes using Seven West media to dominate the conversation. And for some strange reason, Kerry Stokes was on the board of the Australian War Memorial in Canberra, and he also funded the legal cases for Ben Roberts-Smith. But the point is that the influence of these sort of people, it doesn't remain in business. It doesn't remain within the business of mining or the business of media. They try and make it flow in to politics, and then they hijack the events like Anzac Day. And Gina Rinehart donates millions of dollars of her money to her pet right-wing causes to advance Australia. The Institute of Public Affairs, the Liberal Party, One Nation donated a $1 million plane to Pauline Hanson. She also funded Donald Trump's campaign in the United States. And David, of course, it's a free country. People can donate their money to whatever they want to, even if they're flushing their money down a right-wing drain. But we shouldn't be kidding ourselves that having this sort of financial power and then using it in this way doesn't end up influencing politics. And these wealthy and powerful people are getting to define what Anzac Day means for everyone else. And I don't think that should be allowed.
No. First thing I'd do actually is I would ban politicians from speaking at Anzac Day of all stripes. Attending, yes, we have politicians who served in the armed forces. We have politicians whose families served in the armed forces. Yes, they should be there, even as special guests, but they shouldn't speak. The speaking should be done by appropriate people, the president of the local RSL or return services, the troops who managed to go to, of course, some of these people will have political opinions, and that is absolutely their right. And some of them might even disagree with me, which is their right, but why would you? But I think this stuff is too solemn. I don't want to say sacred. Some people bring the term sacred into it, and that to me makes it a bit off-piste, as they say. I think it is a solemn occasion that shouldn't be wrapped up in anything except commemoration. Is a public holiday appropriate? I know what happened to John Howard when it seemed he was threatening public holidays. So, yes, we absolutely keep the public holiday. But I think public holiday is appropriate so people can spend a day to reflect. And if it, like this year, it was on the Saturday and you have the Monday off, great, fine. That's as it should be. I think what we need to do is get the politics out of it as best as you can. All the wars were very political anyway. Defense of empire, the fighting of fascism, the stop of communism, the protection of Western interests in the Middle East. But we can take the local and domestic politics out of it. Does the horrid results of the Battle of the Neck, where the Western Australian light horse went over the top, you've all seen Gallipoli, or if you haven't, was that really a chance for people? Were they saying, yeah, this will stick it to the transgender community? No. For all we know, some of those soldiers could have been transgender. And I'm not going to speculate any more on that because I don't know. But given the statistics that have finally started to come out, some may well have been, but forced into a role that they weren't comfortable with. There would have been gay people. Again, this stuff was not very much spoken about. You get hints of it in Rupert Brooke's poetry and things like that. He was English anyway. But just because it wasn't spoken about doesn't mean it wasn't there. And of course there were radicals. The great Simpson and the Donkey, as Peter Cochrane demonstrated in his book. He only ended up there because he thought he'd get to England, get off the boat at Liverpool and then disappear into his family and desert. But they diverted the boat to Egypt and then Turkey. And because he didn't want to fight, he joined essentially the ambulance crew or the medical branch and becomes a legend almost or definitely against his will and ambitions. And that's the other thing, that our greatest war heroes, Simpson and the Donkey, Weary Dunlop and Nancy Wake, were all healers. They weren't warriors, despite what Kerry Stokes will want to tell you. The three pinnacle ones were healers. They helped. They sheltered, they healed, they got people back from the front line to where they needed the most help. And it doesn't suit Kerry Stokes, who spent a fortune on buying up Victoria Crosses. That's why he was defending.
I think he actually still is defending Ben Robert Smith. Yeah. But speaking of Kerry Stokes, we also had Anzac Day being used in other ways as well. So Ben Robert Smith, who is going to trial over allegations of committing war crimes in Afghanistan. He turned up to one of the dawn services, and of course that's his right. He's innocent until proven guilty if he comes to that. And I'm just wondering if he ran into any of his 21 colleagues who have testified against him. But Seven West Media, that's owned by Kerry Stokes, Seven West Media and News Corporation, well, they've been producing all of these documentaries or running commentary about the innocence of Ben Robert Smith. So once again, they're using Anzac Day for other purposes, pushing this message of, how on earth could this decorated war hero be guilty of war crimes? Well, let the courts decide upon that. And all of these documentaries...
Hitler and Goering were decorated war heroes too, just saying.
They were, and there's been a lot of documentaries made about them too. But all of these documentaries and commentary, they've failed to mention that Ben Robert Smith actually gave his war medal to Kerry Stokes as collateral for the $30 million in court costs. So Kerry Stokes might be trying to protect his asset or investment or whatever. But there's an even bigger issue that's going on here. And you touched on this before, David, that over the past 30 years or so, the right of politics has carefully elevated Anzac Day into this sort of day of mystery. It's almost like a religious day where it becomes untouchable. It's beyond criticism. And if you do anything at all like question it, well, it's almost like you're being sacrilegious about it. And that's one thing that's developed over the past 30 years or so. It's become like a religious day.
Yasmin Abdel-Magid was essentially hounded out of the country because she dared say that the legend from her perspective was a little bit white and a little bit male and that there were other people involved. That to me didn't sound like a terrible slur against Australia Day. Yet she was pilloried every day by The Australian, by The Telegraph, by Seven West Media, by I think 9 Media, 10 Media. the ABC joined in because they hate to miss out on a good pile-on. And she now...
Well, even though she actually worked for the ABC.
And she worked for the ABC. She's now working, I believe, as an engineer which was a training in Britain, because it was just too much here. And that's terrible. Again, had she said, I don't know, every single Anzac was a war criminal who committed crimes against civilians and behaved, and it was every single one of them, and we can't excuse any of them, maybe then you'd enter into a robust discussion. But certainly having a quiet discussion on who is Anzac Day for and what's it mean isn't a worthwhile thing. And we have our solemn services. Great, yes. And we remember not just the troops who died, which is important, but the troops who lived. And we try and remember that we should treat these people a lot better, that they've gone through something really horrible and they're traumatized and they're injured. You can come out physically, mentally, and emotionally ruined from this experience. And those that don't, great. But those that do, whose responsibility is it? But again, we all react in our own way, and we all have different levels of empathy and sympathy and emotional structures that mean we react in all kinds of ways differently. And I note that we only started looking at it seriously around the time that we got to 40 and 50 years after World War II, when it was really too late for a lot of people. Now, I'll be fair, the Australian government has tried in the past to help university for veterans. That worked for those who were suited. Giving away farming land, which was great for those who grew up on a farm. But for those who grew up in St Kilda or Woolloomooloo and then had to try and struggle how to manage a farm in a way that was profitable, all the while dealing with PTSD, what we now call PTSD. It was called shell shock and battle fatigue then. It's the same thing. And a lot of farms go bust, not because it wasn't good land and not because the motives of the farmers weren't good or that they were lazy. It's just that there was too much to deal with. Not only learning a new lifestyle. We can't all be Cincinnatus returning to the farmland once he'd saved Rome again.
Yeah. And I think a lot of those issues has been pushed into the background as well. So I think Anzac Day itself, like the original 1915, that was a huge historical event. It's a huge part of Australia's history, and we can assess all of the events that actually took place on that day, all of the political involvement, Winston Churchill or Andrew Fisher, all of these people that were involved in actually setting up this calamity back in 1915. So I'm not denying that part of it, but for me, I don't feel like I'm part of Anzac Day today because it's been pushed into this space that it's been completely owned by, it's now the far right, and they've got control over Anzac Day. Now, it used to be a case where if you ever questioned Anzac Day or talked about some of those historical factors back in 1915, well, you'd be attacked by the right. But now it's morphed into this secondary stage where if Anzac Day is not performed according to the wishes of the far right, well, you get attacked for that too. You know, you get attacked even more. So if Welcome to Country, well, that gets attacked because it's not according to their definition of what should take place on Anzac Day. And then they throw in all this other stuff, like the flag debate, the immigration debate, climate change, taxation. These are all the things that Gina Reinhardt talked about, transgender issues and racism, talking up all of this stuff on Anzac Day. Now, the whole process, and you talked about depoliticising Anzac Day, but it's not meant to be owned by any side of politics. It's meant to be totally apolitical. And I realise that there's going to be an element of politics involved because the original Anzac Day at Gallipoli was a political act in itself, but it's meant to be a quiet, reflective and respectful day. And once we get the likes of Gina Reinhardt becoming heavily involved, it's turning it into a circus act.
And yeah, this assumption that she knows what the Anzacs were there for. How? There's been quite a lot written on the Diggers and Anzac Day. One thing that hasn't been really made clear is what were the Diggers there for. A lot of them were there for adventure, to defend what they saw as the empire, and they were worried about New Guinea, which is why Australia gets control of New Guinea in 1919 under the various treaties, which we hold till 1972 or 73. I think we can blame Billy Hughes, who really used Anzac Day as one of the things that cements him into Australian politics. I think still the longest serving member of the Australian Parliament at 56 or 57 years. And I think although Bob Katter's catching up, I'm not sure Bob will make it. I think Bob will quietly step down after the next election, but we'll see. Oh, sorry, not after, before the next election. But Billy Hughes was a fixture. He was always a fixture at the Martin Place ceremony every year, no matter what else he was doing, even as Prime Minister, where he could have been anywhere. He always made sure he's back in town for that. Now, he'd done a lot to help the Australian troops in World War One. Sure, maybe, possibly, but he certainly wasn't a frontline troop.
Or maybe it's the case where if Billy Hughes was Prime Minister today, or if he was still in politics today, he'd be the one turning it into a circus because there's no one else around to remind him of what actually took place. Jenna Reinhardt's doing the same thing.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think we've got to get the politics out of it. Either take the religion out of it or make the religion more inclusive. And I grew up in the country, and everyone's just rolled their eyes, and not again, where Anzac Day was a big part of it. So I probably have a different relationship, but it's not as easy a relationship as it used to be, because I can see your point of view, Eddie. I can see the point of view of Yasmin Abdel Magid, that it's not something that needs to be scrapped, but it's something that needs to be refigured in such a way that it's going back to being meaningful, not just political garbage designed to soothe the egos of the easily broken. Sure, discuss all this stuff if you want, but pick a decent time to do it. And Anzac Day is not the time. Anzac Day should be inclusive. It should include everyone, and it should include even our enemies. Not every German soldier was a Nazi in World War II. Not every Vietnamese or Red Chinese was terribly happy about what was going on in Vietnam, but they'd taken a job and had to do it. I'm pretty sure that if you were to ask the original Anzacs, they might have had these attitudes, but they weren't fighting for them. And Australia develops in the way it did, and that's what they fought for. Some of them might have disagreed, of course, but at the time they were there to help the empire, help Australia's national interest as they saw it. Have an adventure. This will be over in 6 months, and we won't be choking to death in the mud of France and Belgium. That won't happen. We're British citizens, but that's what did happen, and that's what we've got to remember. That good people do things that may or may not need to be done, but they see them as being need to be done. And they were working for not the flag, and they may not have even been fighting towards what we see as modern Australia. But without that effort, modern Australia would be a different place, I think. And that's what we have to remember.
That's it for this episode of New Politics. Thanks for listening in. And if you value independent journalism without the influence of corporate backing, join New Politics at newpolitics.com.au and support us directly. It's just $5 per month, and we always try to keep it very simple. If you like what we do, please send some support our way. It keeps our commitment to independent journalism ticking along. I'm Eddie Djokovic. Thanks for listening in, and it's goodbye to our listeners.
I'm David Lewis. We'll see you next time.
Whatever happened to Leon Trotsky? He got an ice pick that made